We're live.
Yes, we are live.
We're live.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 34 of the TechForge podcast. I'm your host, Dynamo Ned, and joined, as always, by my faithful co-host, Jason.
Hi, Ned.
Unfortunately, our friend Hunter has had a late evening at work, and while he said he would join us when he's able to, understandably, he may not be able to make it this evening. So,
I miss Protoss Belly.
yes, we all do.
Protoss Belly. Where are you, Protoss?
Thankfully, we have quite a bit to talk about in this show.
Really? Dude, it's been a slow news week.
It has, but there's some big stories drop. In particular, this one just landed in the last couple of days. Our first story this week is about another Intel CPU flaw. This one, spoiler, is called Spoiler.
It's so cliche.
So basically, this is yet another speculative execution flaw in Intel processors.
No
For
way.
those of you who don't remember what that meant with Spectre, speculative execution is when the processor does steps ahead of time by speculating about what instruction or what. This is a way Intel was able to speed up calculations within their processor by basically doing extra math ahead of time based on what it's had to do before.
Otherwise known as a predictive exploit?
Pretty much.
Or an exploit in the future time?
And so, basically, what they found about Spoiler was this was found by Google's Group Zero, the one that finds such flaws, and they also helped in finding the Spectre and Meltdown flaws.
Sweet.
They notified Intel 90 days, gave them the 90 days, and Intel did nothing with it. So they brought it to the public. And so, basically, the new Spoiler attack is similar, but decidedly different from Spectre. Basically, instead of using an attack on the branch prediction in the Intel operation scheduler, this one instead uses address speculation in main memory. Basically, it utilizes Intel's proprietary implementation of their memory subsystem to directly leak timing behavior due to physical address conflicts.
That's
in other words,
a nasty exploit, man.
In other words, it basically causes address conflicts in order to obtain data about what is in main memory.
Right.
And the thing is, this is in Intel's proprietary memory subsystem, which means this particular flaw does not affect AMD CPUs, and the previously implemented hardware and architecture fixes for Spectre and Meltdown are not mitigated for Spoiler. Or excuse me, Spoiler is not mitigated by those fixes, is what I should say. And so that means Intel has yet another issue where they're going to have to implement entirely new silicon to mitigate what is admittedly a hardware flaw that is easily exploited in software. And all it takes is a malicious actor to use this flaw, and until Spoiler can be fixed, well, basically we're in the same spot we were at this point in 2017 when Spectre and Meltdown were revealed, putting us in the very hard place of using an Intel, if you're using an Intel system, there's not really much you can do about it. Yes, Microsoft is working on building in some software mitigations into Windows, and some Linux mitigations are already working their way through the kernel. But until these can be fixed on the hardware level, we just have to kind of hope and pray the operating system can mitigate it for us. And we all know how well that usually works.
Yeah, takes a while. Sometimes they do all right, but I don't know. Man, Intel just has not had a good time with it over the last 2 years.
No, they first Spectre and Meltdown, and now Spoiler.
Right.
And it's just not been a good time for Intel these last couple of years. Thankfully, they do have a little bit of good news coming on the heels of their release of the Thunderbolt 3 standard. Because Thunderbolt 3 is not going to be Thunderbolt 3. It's going to be USB 4.
No kidding.
So the USB Promoter Group, which is the standards body behind the USB specification, who worked with the USB-IF that we talked about last week, with their wonderful, wonderful naming of USB 3.2. And by the way, they further tripped over USB 4 because unlike USB 3.2, there's no space between the USB and the number because reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
But the good news about the USB 4 architecture is that this new speedy interface should be coming out very, very soon. In fact, it's going to offer twice the bandwidth of USB 3.2 with up to 40 gigabits per second of throughput.
That's insane.
And so the USB 4 standard also is going to be implementing the Thunderbolt 3 Intel is going to be implementing the Thunderbolt 3 protocols through the USB 4 standard, which means Intel is contributing their Thunderbolt protocols without royalties. Now, this isn't the same as open source, but it'll be the first time that Thunderbolt has been a royalty-free technology, which means other manufacturers can build supporting silicon for Thunderbolt without having to pay a fee, which means we could see Thunderbolt 3 via USB-C finally becoming a widely adopted technology because you're not going to need a silly Thunderbolt connector specifically to implement Thunderbolt anymore. And honestly, this is a huge boon for Intel because you can only use Thunderbolt if you have an Intel CPU because Thunderbolt is an Intel proprietary technology.
Right.
Which means if you want to use Thunderbolt 3 through USB-C, you got to have Intel. That said, it would not surprise me to see AMD come out with a solution of their own to implement Thunderbolt on their, or a similar 40 gigabit per second standard on their CPUs as well.
Wouldn't surprise me. It's insane how fast these buses are getting. These external buses. Why run SATA anymore? That's just crazy.
And that's actually that's a good point. At 40 gigabits per second, at that point, you're running fast enough that you could, theoretically, run a GPU externally through USB-C using the Thunderbolt 3 protocols in such a manner that if you had, say, an Ultrabook and an external dock for a GPU, as long as you had a USB-C cable and had a port that was Thunderbolt 3 compatible or USB 4 compatible, then you could actually finally have what has largely been the holy grail for mobile users for a long time, which is a light, portable, and powerful Ultrabook that you can also sit down and use on a desktop space as not only just a productivity machine, but also as a gaming one as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
because how fast is that versus PCIe 3.0?
that is a good question.
I'm guessing that's what, a 4x just about?
Yeah, 40 gigabits per second is roughly on par with PCIe 3.0 times 4.
Okay.
That's the reason that Thunderbolt 2 was able to work as an external GPU dock technology, because it was roughly equivalent to that PCIe times 4, because that was the minimum you needed to really be able to leverage a GPU correctly.
I want to say that would have been PCIe 2.0 times 4.
For Thunderbolt 2, I'd have to check, but
So that's 5 gigabytes per second, right?
So this is 40 gigabits per second, 5 gigabytes per second, right?
So PCIe 3 4 or X4 is 3.9 gigabytes per second. It's actually a little faster.
So yeah, this is more in the range of by 8. So exciting times ahead. If you're interested in a Thunderbolt 3 USB-C style solution that does it all, we could be seeing that real soon. Because according to the USB Promoters Group, we should be seeing Thunderbolt 3 devices via USB-C, aka USB4, by the end of 2019.
Interesting.
The standard is supposed to be finalized by the middle of this year, and the first implementations of the tech should appear by the end of the year.
So in terms of external video cards, I would assume maybe a 60 level part would be good. Probably no more than that.
Well, some of the external GPU manufacturers have implemented up to, at the time, GTX 1080s and 1080 Ti's in external GPU racks. But you're right, you wind up being bottlenecked by the Thunderbolt 2 interface. And that is the nice thing about Thunderbolt 3, is it removes that bottleneck.
Well,
or some of that bottleneck.
Massages it. It opens it up a little, but that would still be a bottleneck for a 70 or higher.
Most likely. But when you're going from Intel integrated graphics to being able to plug in an external GPU and still play on your laptop, you realize there are sacrifices that have to be made.
Oh, gosh, yeah, man. I mean, if you're going from, say, like an IGP, even an AMD APU, if you're going from an IGP to, say, like even a 1060 6 gig, and you're not really bottlenecking it that hard over the bus, that's huge, man. That's like 1080p Ultra. That's going from 720p to 1080p Ultra, like right there. Boom. Plus all of the other functionality that a GPU like that gives you. So that's not bad. I mean, yeah. When you think about it. Of course, mobile gaming is kind of meh.
I mean, that's fair. All right. And speaking of running things over the PCIe interface, this next one's from a site called Blocks and Files. It says the irresistible rise of NVMe means SATA SSD days are numbered.
Well, I think it's going to be more about price point. So NVMe keeps coming down in price. That's I think that's partly because demand is low and stocks are higher, but they keep coming out with new generations of NVMe. That honestly just comes down to price because SATA for the longest time has always been cheaper.
Well, and that's part of the thing they show here. Let me go ahead and share this because it is a pretty important chart in my opinion. So let's take a look. I'm going to blow this up a little so it's a little easier to read. This chart here shows that NVMe SSDs and SATA SSDs, their price relative to their capacity. Notice NVMe SSDs and SATA SSDs are already starting to dip below, or they're estimating that by 2020, they're going to start dipping below the dollar per gigabyte of 15K hard disk drives. Now, in consumer hard disks, we hardly ever see 15K drives. They're mostly designed for data centers that need rapid storage, but also in copious quantities.
Right. It's rare to find a 10K, honestly, at the consumer level.
Most of us are familiar more with the 7.2K hard drive.
Right.
Or even 5900 for like archival storage.
Mm-hmm.
But notice, according to this slide here, this is from Western Digital, by the way. They're estimating that by 2020, NVMe and SATA SSDs will be lower in price per gigabyte than 15K hard disk drives and will be not that far from the price per gigabyte of 10K hard disk drives.
Well, more importantly, right around the end of 2019 to 2020, if this trend continues, NVMe and SATA SSDs will be at price parity.
Right, which is the big bit of news for consumers.
Right. Right. That's pretty fantastic, actually. We're starting to see those we're starting to see sales and deals on those NVMe drives that are bringing them very close to price parity with SATA at the same capacity.
And there was, in fact, a deal I almost included in this week's deals, but it was still just a little bit too expensive. It was an Intel 660p NVMe SSD, 1 terabyte for $105, which is a really good price for a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, even though admittedly the 660p is one of the slowest NVMe drives out there. But you're still hitting 1800 megabits per second. So
yeah,
it's really hard to complain at that point.
Makes for really good scratch disk. Or even a boot drive, really.
Or even a drive for your Steam games if you wanted them to load real quickly.
Yep.
Because at 1 terabyte, you can fit a lot of games on there.
Oh, yeah, you can.
Well, unless they're something like Wolfenstein or, you know, the new
100 gigabyte games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's Titanfall 2 with its 68 gigabytes of sound files. Gosh, that was ridiculous.
What was this other... go ahead.
I was going to say, of course, all of this is mostly focused on the data center, as this Western Digital's presentation was from the A3 Tech Live conference in London, where they showed this information. And they also discussed how NVMe, in their opinion, NVMe is going to be the de facto interface due to scalability and the lowest latency benefits over the next 5 years. And I don't think they're wrong in the data center space. I think we may see a little bit more lag when it comes to the consumer space. Mm-hmm. But if what that initial slide showed turns out to be true, and NVMe SSDs start being at price parity to SATA ones, that lag might not be nearly as long as we think.
See, I'm surprised we really haven't had an update in the SATA space because SATA is still the de facto standard for consumer level PCs and notebooks. I'm surprised there hasn't been an update to the SATA protocol because we've had SATA 3 for quite a while.
That's true.
And since it's still the standard and it's been the standard for a long time, I'm surprised. I doubt that would be a revenue issue. You know what I mean? I I'm just really surprised that they wouldn't try to compete more with NVMe.
Well, they kind of did. Unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. If you do, you remember back in the late aughts, the late 2000s, there was a push for against NVMe called SATA Express.
I remember this.
So SATA Express was an attempt to implement SATA over the PCI Express bus.
Mm-hmm.
But as the technologies went forward, NVMe started winning out. In particular, as the M.2 interface began to get standardized. I mean, technically, you can absolutely implement SATA over the M.2 interface. I mean, a lot of SSDs do.
Mm-hmm.
But since the problem with SATA Express largely was it required a proprietary connector.
Right, which was not compatible with SATA.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing USB protocols now which use the standard USB port shape that are as fast as SATA and faster.
Right. The 6
So,
gigabits per second at this point that SATA 3 provides has largely been overtaken by all the others. And I think part of the reason we haven't seen a revision of SATA is at this point, does it really matter?
well, they're eventually going to die off. It might take a while, but
I mean, consider how long it took IDE to die off.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, SATA started coming out. You initially needed, that really annoying driver disk to press
Yeah.
F6 during the XP install. And then all that stuff was corrected with Vista or custom ISOs of XP where you would just include your SATA driver. But yeah, Vista corrected all that because they included the SATA driver built into the install. So, and it seemed like at that point, IDE was pretty much dead. Like you could still get IDE stuff, but everyone would rather have a smaller cable.
Yep.
So,
do you remember the old practice of cablegami, where you would fold the IDE cables in just the right way, where you didn't have any excess, and you could stick it between the drives, so that you could. That was like the first cable management.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Good times.
Cablegami. I've not heard it referred to as that. That's funny.
Well, I give that particular honor of that title to Bill Owen. He's the one I heard it from first, describing it on his. I had seen it and I'd done it myself, but he was the first one I'd ever heard to have it called cablegami.
Nice.
Okay. Some more good news in the tech space, although this is a little bit longer term, so it may not be quite as soon for us in the consumer space, but that's that DRAM prices continue to fall, and according to TechSpot, are facing their sharpest decline since 2011.
Well, we've been hearing news about this stuff and the estimated DRAM prices since the summer. So they just keep. I mean, it's been slow for some of the SKUs and parts, like the 3200 megahertz stuff. The 16 gig kits you can get for pretty good price, but 32 is still, you know, the 2x by 16, those types of DIMMs, those are still kind of high up there in price. But yeah, DRAM keeps falling down, which is really nice. I mean, if you watch your deals, you can find the 3000 megahertz stuff usually around $100 for 16 gigs. So that's pretty crazy, man.
Yeah, according to DRAM Exchange, which is where TechSpot gets their information, they expect DRAM contract prices to decline by nearly 30% this quarter of 2019.
Good.
Which means that we will likely see prices in the market decline, not quite that much, but overall should see DRAM prices fall. According to DRAM Exchange, contract prices dropped in the fourth quarter of 2018, and most DRAM suppliers are currently holding about 6 weeks worth of inventory. And you know what happens when you get backed up with inventory? You start fire selling it.
Prices come down.
They're not the only ones to experience this problem, by the way. NVIDIA did too, but we'll talk more about that in a bit.
they're still experiencing that.
Yeah. And so basically, their DRAM Exchange's analysis on all of this is basically Intel is currently experiencing a supply shortage, which is expected to run through the end of the third quarter of this year. And that means there's going to be less people trying to buy RAM for Intel systems, which means that PC OEMs are not to consume as much DRAM as they normally would, which means unless demand makes a strong comeback, high inventory means they want to get rid of the inventory, which means fire sale.
Well, it's good for now, but what will eventually happen is Intel will fix its supply problems. Demand will pick back up, and then the RAM prices will just shoot right back up through the roof again. I'm not sure when that'll happen. I'm assuming that'll happen in 2020.
Of course, that's assuming that DDR5 doesn't suddenly make its appearance sometime in the next year or so.
That's true. I mean, I want to say when the first gen Ryzen stuff came out, they were projecting 2020 to have DDR5 chipsets.
That's true. So,
and we have not heard much news around that.
That's true as well. Hopefully, we will see some lower prices in the DRAM market, though, because I really want to buy some fresh RAM for a couple of my DDR4 systems. And let me tell you, the prices just ain't nice.
Well, hopefully the prices will continue to fall. So.
And speaking of prices, it seems EVGA is wanting to enlist its customers in order to give them price breaks of a sort in their store. This comes from PC Gamer. EVGA is enlisting customers to peddle its products for a kickback in store bucks. Active forum posters and past customers can sign up for what EVGA is calling its associate program. First, share your associate code with someone interested in purchasing an EVGA product. Next, once they get to evga.com, they will need to make a purchase from one of the product types on the dashboard. And finally, the buyer must use your associate code during checkout to receive the discount.
I mean, it's nice, but it's not a huge discount. Like they're saying 5%, 3%, 10% is a bundled discount. It just doesn't seem like a good enough deal to me, honestly.
I mean, basically what this works out to is this is Amazon affiliate codes, but just for EVGA's site
Hmm.
and done in a far more clunky manner.
I wonder what their profit margin is on their video cards, because Nvidia makes 60% profit
That's a
on
good
average.
question.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love EVGA. They make fantastic parts. I've I've had their video cards and their power supplies, and they're amazing. But I just I don't know. I'm still kind of angry about RTX pricing. I won't go into that, but but yeah, interesting. It does
Well,
it reading the article is clunky.
mm-hmm.
I'd hate to see what the buying experience is like.
Right?
No, I mean, at least they're doing something. It's creative, it's interesting, but yeah, it looks clunky. So,
Yeah, it really does. Okay, so that brings us to the first big show topic. Of course, it's no secret at this point that AMD is planning to launch their Ryzen 3000 series processors sometime in 2019. However, we have some new additional information based on a number of leaks and some information that AMD themselves gave out at their investor meeting earlier this month. So we'll start first with the leaks from a retailer out of Singapore about the Ryzen 3000 CPU Zen 2 stack. Now, this comes originally from a site called Bizgram Asia, which apparently is a retailer out of Singapore.
okay.
And this matches a lot of what we've seen before about AMD Ryzen 3000 CPUs. So I have a link here. Apparently, this is a price list that they generated and they put out for everyone to see quite every so often. And so this price list, someone was able to yoink a copy of it before it was taken down. So let's take a look at this real quick.
Oh wow.
So this is from Bizgram Asia. As you can see, it's kind of hard to read. So we're going to expand it just a little bit. Okay. This is at 195% magnification. So most of what you see here is nothing really out of the ordinary. You've got Z390 motherboards, Cabby Lake motherboards, LGA 1151, Coffee Lake processors, LGA 2066 processors, fairly standard AMD Ryzen motherboards, you know, B350, X370, B450, X470. Until you get down here, notice you got these AMD CPUs. These all look pretty normal, right? 1200, 1400, 1600, etc., etc. Until we work our way down a little bit further. Oh, did I miss it? I had this earlier. Of
Their
course,
CPUs continued, or
I lost my place. Okay, let's pop back up to the beginning.
well, in that article, there's a cutout for
Yeah. So let's,
Ryzen, and it's blown up. So
yeah. Again, notice. Okay, so what they did, if you look real close at what they did, apparently someone must have got to this before they made the pull, because you'll notice what they did.
Yeah, that Hikvision CCTV or
Yeah, they
whatever.
dropped all that on
Yeah.
top of what the original one was, which listed all these Ryzen 3000 parts.
Right.
So apparently someone got to it before they could get the actual pull. But this is from the original. You can see you notice on the other one, it stops after the 200 GE, and you suddenly have this talk about the Hikvision CCTV stuff. In the original, it went on to continue with a Ryzen 3 3300, 3300X, 3300G, a Ryzen 5 3600, 3600X, and 3600G, and a Ryzen 7 3700, 3700X, and then this is the new interesting one, a Ryzen 9 3800X and a 3850X.
Those prices are inflated, man.
Well, remember, these are in the Singaporean currency.
Oh, I have no idea. Are they?
Singapore dollars. So,
Now let's get a converter up.
okay.
Okay, so basically 1 Singapore dollar equals about 74 cents.
So basically multiply these by 0.75 or 0.74, but 3/4 is easier.
So the Ryzen 7 3700 at 455 equals $334. That's still a bit inflated.
Well, considering the Ryzen 7 2700X is running right around that price, that's not that crazy. 2700X is about 330 right now, if I remember right.
Well, it's 347 technically right off that spec sheet. However, let's take a look at Newegg and see what they've got. The 2700X has been selling really well, so I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. $2,700X. Why don't you show me? Hello. 2700X is 309 on Newegg, and it's the 2700 is 249. So
okay, so slightly higher than what was before, but not terribly so.
Yeah.
Regardless, basically what they're saying here is the new Ryzen 3 3300 apparently is supposed to be a 6-core, 6-thread CPU.
Okay.
The 3600 and 8-core. I'm sure. I don't know if they don't have confirmation yet about whether SMT will be enabled on all these or not.
I would imagine they would be. I mean, that would be a very interesting move if they had a Ryzen 5 part. If they're all 8-core, that'd be like the Intel move, right? Because they'd go from a 12-thread to an 8-thread.
Well,
case.
If they were going to do that, what I would think they would likely do is make the non-X part not have SMT, and then have the X part be the one with SMT enabled.
And they'd probably give it a clock boost too.
Right. I mean, if they were going to go the whole Intel route, of course, with it being AMD, who knows? I'm basing part of that on the fact that, you know, the 2200G is a 4-core, 4-thread part,
Mhm.
whereas you have the 2400G, which is a 4-core, 8-thread part. Of course, it's only at the low end that AMD has done that.
Yeah, it's only been at the Ryzen 3. At the Ryzen 3 level. Like the very entry level part of their Ryzen product stack.
So, but apparently the rumor is that the new Ryzen 9s will basically be on par with the Threadripper 1950Xs of the world at 16 cores, 32 threads on a consumer grade desktop CPU.
That's insane.
Which
That's
is part of the reason why you're seeing that 760 Singaporean dollars, which runs up to right around 500 USD. But on the other hand, the 1800X I'm using in my system when it first came out was 549.
That's true.
So
people, when these chips come out, don't get a 12 or 16 core CPU and drop it in a $50 B350 motherboard.
yes,
And
please do
expect it
not
to
do
work.
that.
Do not do that. Do not expect it to work. And the same goes for a cheap B450. If you have an older motherboard, you want a nice VRM on your X370 or X470. We're not talking about the bargain bin $100 or $120 motherboards. We're talking upper scale, at least $180 most likely. And then, even then, you might have problems running some of these. Because what are they saying?
Want to crank them.
Yeah. I mean, what were they saying about the higher end Ryzen 9s? That they might be 120 to 130 watt TDP?
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, if you've got a Crosshair or a Gaming 7 or something, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, according to the previously leaked specs on the Ryzen 9 3850X, they're estimating a 4.3 gigahertz base clock, and a 5.1 gigahertz boost clock with a TDP of 135 watts.
Yeah. Which, isn't that on par with the 1950X pretty much as far as TDP goes?
Well, 1950X technically has 180 watt TDP.
Ah, okay.
But again, I would imagine that such a chip as this, if you put it under the same kind of load you would a 1950X, you'd probably see those same kind of TDP numbers.
Yeah. Even though the memory controller is cut in half.
Right.
But yeah, you'd still see similar I mean, you'd still see similar power draw.
And I mean, we saw back at Computex or not Computex. No, it was Computex. I'm tired, people.
Yeah, me too.
Where they showed off the 8-core CPU, and there was very, very obviously the room for an additional die there for 8 more cores.
Yeah, but it was also, as they were starting to really ramp up Cinebench, it was consuming a lot less power than the 9900K.
Right.
A lot less power. That was very impressive. Very impressive.
And the fact that, I mean, we all saw the traces that they had masked over on the samples that they were showing people. It was very obvious. And Lisa Su even kind of very cheekily added, yeah, there's definitely more room on there.
Wouldn't that was probably a Ryzen 5 part?
And if so, that makes it all the more impressive.
That's extremely impressive. Because the 9900K is it's not a slouch CPU. That thing is a monster.
I mean, if a Ryzen 5 3600 makes my Ryzen 7 1800X obsolete, I am totally okay with this.
Yeah, I am too. Oh, well, if it makes my 2700X obsolete.
So be it.
Yeah. Well, they're claiming twice the CPU horsepower, right? So,
And of course, they're saying the 3700 and 3700X will be 12 cores. The 3600 and 3600X will be quad or octa cores, and the 3300 and 3300X they're estimating as a hexacore, 6 cores, potentially 12 threads for under $150.
I'm very, very curious to see what the 3600G is going to be all about. Because not too long from now, they're going to have the newer consoles come out, right? And they're going to be based on Zen or Zen Plus or maybe even Zen 3. I'm not sure. And they're going to have Navi as their APU. So I would wonder if they're going to stick with Vega or if they're going to go with Navi.
Well, the rumor mill right now is that the 3600G and the 3300G are supposed to be featuring Navi parts.
That's going to be impressive.
Honestly, I think that will depend on when they choose to launch them, though.
Yeah.
Because I doubt they would launch Navi parts or APUs with Navi GPU cores before launching the actual Navi cards.
Right. Well, I've heard some speculation that that'll probably be later in the year. So if rumor is true and they release Navi with the Ryzen update and a chipset, I want to say could be late Q3, early Q4 when they release the APUs.
And that would be roughly on par with what they've done in the past. You know, the 2200G and the 2400G came, what was it, about 4 to 6 months after the Ryzen 2000 parts?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Because I'd built that 2400G system for my Munchkins just maybe a month or two after it came out. So, and that was around August, I think. So, yeah, that sounds about right.
Speaking of the launch for Ryzen 3000, we do have some confirmation. And obviously, the previous article, it's from WCCF Tech. It's based on sources that may be slightly sketchy. Take it with a grain of salt.
Everything.
However,
all leaks are sketchy, dude.
However, this one, it's less a leak and more deliberately leaked information on Intel or AMD's part from their investor presentation earlier this month. And the thing that leaked is something that was largely thought to be the case in most of the tech community, but is now confirmed. AMD Ryzen 3000 is aiming for a mid-2019 launch. In particular, during their investor relations meeting and their investor presentation for March of 2019 for the current quarter, they showed off particularly a slide, which I am now going to show to everyone else. This slide, present to everyone. This slide where they showed their client lineup for 2019. Notice they've already checked off second-gen Ryzen mobile APUs, AMD-powered Chromebooks, which, yes, those are out now, and Athlon Mobile APU. So those have already launched. Notice second-gen Ryzen Pro Mobile is launching in the spring. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But
Okay.
3rd gen Ryzen desktop processors, mid-year. They also mentioned 3rd gen Ryzen Threadripper. They don't have any times specified on this one, but we have some additional sources that indicate it could be in Q3 to Q4 of this year. So there is that.
I'd say probably Q3. Because if it's to be believed, we're looking at what, June for Ryzen 3000. So that'd
June
be
or July is the current rumor.
okay. So it could be we get Ryzen 3000 in July and then Threadripper in August or September.
And that would fit with their almost standard roadmap at this point.
Yeah, but typically we've got stuff in March, I think, right?
Well, technically we are getting stuff in March because
The mobile.
yeah, we're getting the mobile stuff. Which the mobile stuff is actually looking pretty good this time around.
Yeah.
But
I really love the fact that they're finally standardized the drivers. That's
yes,
been a long time coming.
that was a big deal
Mhm.
because basically you were having to rely on your manufacturer to push out whatever the latest driver was. And so you couldn't use the generic Radeon Wattman or the Radeon settings to download the drivers for your mobile APU.
Right.
Yeah, that was a big oof on their part,
Yeah.
but now they fixed it. Speaking of Ryzen Mobile, this is a WCCF Tech exclusive. So again, this is from industry sources. So take with huge grain of salt. According to Usman Prasada's industry sources, AMD's Ryzen 7 3750H, which is going to be their high-end mobile part, will be launching and hitting shelves in April. This would actually make sense based on another piece of information, this one also exclusive from WCCF Tech, that Intel is planning to launch their Core i7 9750H on April the 21st with availability in May. So it looks like AMD is doing their classic tactic of naming their CPUs after Intel's so that it's blatantly clear what CPU they're supposed to be matched against.
Mm-hmm.
So the 3750H is obviously supposed to be going toe-to-toe with the 8750H. And the 9750H that's supposed to be coming out soon. I do feel like the 3750H, though, is at a slight disadvantage.
Well, the 9750H is probably going to be a 6-core part, I'm guessing.
Right. Whereas the 3750H is going to be a quad-core 8-threaded part.
Yep.
Now, admittedly, its clock speeds are going to be up significantly from its predecessor, the 2700U, but it
shouldn't be expected to compete against a 6-core 12-thread part, honestly.
Right. But apparently AMD has decided to name it as such to make it clear that it is their flagship mobile APU.
Okay.
So we'll see how it goes. We talked about last week how the first Ryzen-equipped, the Ryzen 3000 mobile-equipped laptops were coming out. And I actually found on Newegg today that same Asus FX505 laptop. It is selling for $699 with a Ryzen 5 3350H and an RX 560X.
Sweet.
And it was a really tempting purchase.
Bet.
Till I remembered I had rent.
Darn bills.
You can't get rid of them, and they're completely unavoidable.
Yeah. Silly bills.
All right. But speaking of laptops, there was an interesting story that I originally was going to include here, but there was a follow-up story that actually makes it even more interesting. So, originally notebookcheck.net pointed out that Dell had put some interesting specs for an upcoming laptop on their website, mentioning an RTX 2050, which is an unannounced part number, but would indicate that NVIDIA is attempting to make an RTX 2050 variant. Well, Dell updated their website, and in doing so, actually leaked something else.
Oh, what did they leak?
They leaked the fact that a GTX 1660 Ti mobile variant exists.
Oh, okay.
So apparently the mention of an RTX 2050 has been replaced with a GTX 1660 Ti reference. In particular, the important detail on their configurator that's changed was this about USB-C Thunderbolt 3. The USB-C Thunderbolt will be on systems with an RTX 2060 and up, while the USB-C DisplayPort will be on systems with the GTX 1660 Ti. Now, so far, NVIDIA has not announced a mobile variant of the GTX 1660 Ti. However, based on this leak, unintentional on Dell's part as it may be, it seems that we should be expecting a laptop version of the GTX 1660 Ti, which is not terribly surprising. I mean, let's face it. NVIDIA needs something to replace the 1050 Ti and the GTX 1060 in their entry-level gaming laptops.
Yep.
And the 1660 Ti is perfectly positioned to replace the 1060 in that $1,000 to $1,500 price bracket.
1,000 to 1,500. Oh, in the mobile?
For mobile.
Okay.
Right now, you can buy laptops in roughly the $800 to $1,200 range that have GTX 1060s. And so the 1660 Ti would be the obvious upgrade for that. Of course, we have seen some information, in particular regarding the RTX 2060 and 2070 laptop variants. I'd recommend going and watching Hardware Unboxed work in particular. Tim does an excellent job on there, showing how the laptop variants are severely downclocked from their desktop counterparts, and how the performance, unlike like it was with Pascal, where the 1060 laptop variant was usually within 5 to 10% of the desktop variant. In this case, there's differences sometimes wildly between 18 and 25% between the laptop variant and the desktop variant.
That's just silly. But, I mean, that's what you get. Desktop is not constrained by power consumption and heat. So that's one reason why I've always wondered why people get gaming laptops over a desktop.
Heat is an issue when you're dealing with gaming laptops. And now, admittedly, when I was in college, I wanted to have one machine that I could use for everything. So I bought a gaming laptop. But that was well over 15 years ago. And at the time, a gaming laptop consisted of a Pentium 4 with hyperthreading, 1 gig of RAM, and an ATI Radeon 9700 Mobile Pro. with 128 megabytes of RAM,
Yeah.
of video RAM.
Right.
Still have that system, by the way. Still works
Really?
great.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to remember to bring it on the show sometime because it's a neat little piece of nostalgia. It was an original Dell Inspiron XPS, the first generation they did of XPS laptops.
I remember those. Those things were tanks.
Oh yeah, it's a big chunk.
It's a big chunk. Yeah, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, maybe we have time toward the end of the show. Just remind me. All right, this next one comes from a Spanish site called Calcotland. But when translated, it shows something interesting, at least for the EU market, and that we could see soon in the US market. And that is the GTX 1060 being cut down from its current price of $249 MSRP to $179 MSRP. Remember how I talked about earlier about NVIDIA and their supply problems, in particular their huge inventory of GTX 1060s?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is what they're doing to get rid of them. Fire sale, fire sale, fire sale.
Yep.
Obviously, with the release of the 1660 Ti, they want to try to get rid of the rest of the inventory of the 1060 so that they can flood the channel with 1660 Ti's.
Which makes you wonder if they're going to have the same problem with the 1660 Ti's they have now with the 1060.
This drop, of course, this is in the European market, so it's 179 euros. But this drop to 179 euros does bring the 1060 6 gigabyte to a lower price than the AMD RX 580. Of course, we talked about last week, the RX 580 apparently is slated for some price cuts of its own.
Mm-hmm. Which is odd because I want to say that article had mentioned pricing down to 200, but for a while now we've seen 588 gigs come around. I want to say between, I think entry level probably 170, 180, right?
Mm-hmm. With deals sometimes as low as 150.
Right. So, I mean, at that price, it's a steal, especially considering you get $150 game bundle.
It's now about $120 game bundle because you get to choose 2 games instead of 3. But still, you're still getting 2 $60 titles
and a solid 1080p gaming card.
And one of our deals this evening actually has that same bundle tied with it. So it's an RX 570, but it's a really good deal. And basically, once you take into account the discounts, the price of the games basically almost pays the price of the card.
Wow.
But let's not get there too fast. So bring down the price of the GTX 1060 6 gig to $179. If NVIDIA wants to clear the market that way of the 1060, I think that's a great idea. The 1060 is still a extremely valid card to play 1080p high, 1080p ultra in most games. 1080p high if you want to get 60 plus FPS, but
right. Which is really, really good considering, you know, when those parts came out, they're getting about the same performance.
Mm-hmm.
So those parts have really aged well. And they're 3 years old.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that the 10 series and the RX series are 3 years old at this point.
I know.
But we do have a brand new card I wanted to talk about this because this is insane. This is from Tom's Hardware. Hardware manufacturer Colorful, which makes NVIDIA GPUs, is offering an RTX 2080 Ti graphics card for $3,000.
Yeah, which makes it more expensive than the Titan.
If you thought the RTX 2080 Ti at $1,200 or $1,300 was too expensive, double that, and you still don't have Colorful's RTX 2080 Ti Kuden. The iGame GeForce RTX 2080 Ti Kuden was listed at Chinese retailer JD and starts at 19,999 yen, which is roughly 2,980 USD. Now, admittedly, this card does come with a fan with an integrated water block system, a set of 3 fans over that water block and fin stack system, and basically, yeah, this thing is well over the top.
And I mean, it's got everything is over the top with it. It's got a monster VRM, it's got a monster PCB, it's got a monster cooler on there, and a water block, and it looks amazing. I mean, the I don't know what that theme is, if that's like a gothic thing or like a steampunk thing or whatever, but that honestly, if you forget about the price point for a second, it's a beautiful part. It's a beautiful card. But
yeah, I'm
then you look at the price point. Yeah, then you look at the price point and it's like, really? $3,000 for a 2080 Ti.
And notice
it should be priced
$750. PCIe 8-pin power plugs.
Oh yeah. Well, dude, RTX takes a lot of power. That's like what is the 2080 Ti GPU? How big is that? I want to say that's like 700.
It's 754 millimeters, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Millimeters squared?
Right, because area.
Yeah. You know how big Vega 64 is? It's like 400 millimeters squared, I think. Or 500?
And it's
500.
And it was considered a huge die.
Yeah. Well, 2080 and 2080 Ti just kind of blow it out of the water. So, and RTX above 2070, all those parts consume a lot of power. Yeah, they perform really well, but yeah, all those parts consume a lot of power and generate a ton of heat.
So yeah, having that integrated fan system and water block and the VRMs and all that other stuff on board. If you want to buy an RTX 2080 Ti that's more expensive than the RTX Titan by about $600, then more power to you, but it's really not a good value for your money.
Or you can buy a budget 2080 Ti and put a water block on it for $100 to $150.
Why, are you suggesting that it's potentially cheaper to do it yourself?
Yeah. It's amazing. Or you can spend $1,500 or $1,600 and get either the Gigabyte or the MSI or the EVGA that include a water block on the car.
Right. I mean, this is a nice feature, having that integrated water block. But yeah, that's
not $3,000 nice feature.
Right.
I mean, that's $500 more than the Titan. And at least the Titan you can justify if you look at the 2080 Ti as a baseline and say, okay, give me 2080 Ti with more floating point math calculation, and then what, like 30 or 40% more video memory?
Right.
Okay.
At that point, you're essentially buying a workstation card without buying a workstation.
Yeah, then you can kind of rationalize that purchase, even though it's still a ridiculous purchase, but still. You can
Right.
kind of rationalize it. $3,000 for a 2080 Ti, dude. I wonder if they're on medicinal herbs.
I mean, that's a possibility, but
Yeah,
let's
they're
not
on
let's not cast any aspersions that we don't have evidence for.
aspersions about herbs.
Speaking of having $3,000 to spend, the truth of the matter is, if you wanted to buy all the hardware deals that we're going to have this evening, and we have 5 of them, you could do that 3 times over and still have money left over.
You could.
Rather than buying that $3,000 graphics card.
Right. You could buy all of the parts in the hardware deals and have the beginnings of 2 systems. Like $3,000, man. For the price of that thing, you can build 3 extremely solid 1080p, pretty decent 1440p gaming machines.
Exactly. And speaking of which, the first deal we have this evening, this is from Newegg, and it is for, and now we talked about the spoiler exploit, and obviously that affects these Intel parts, but I received some feedback on the show from some other people who wanted to see some Intel part deals. And, well, they're not really that common because Intel is having their problems with supply shortages, but this is a pretty good one. You get a Core i5 9400F. It's essentially the sequel to the i5 8400, only this being an F variant means it does not have an internal graphics chip, or the internal graphics are disabled. But it is a base 2.9 gigahertz, but has a 4.1 gigahertz turbo. It is a 6-core, 6-thread part with a 65-watt TDP.
Oh, right.
And you get this MSI Gaming B360M Gaming Plus motherboard, which is normally an $80 value. As you may notice, the CPU by itself is normally $179.99. The motherboard is normally $80. But you can get the 2 of them together for $209.98 minus 10 additional dollars for the mail-in rebate, which means in total you can basically buy the processor and get the motherboard for $20.
Yeah, and that's, I mean,
And yes, I agree. Given what we see from the motherboard here, it's not the greatest one in the world. But remember,
I wouldn't say this is an $80 board. Oh
remember, you're pairing it with a 9400F, which is a 65-watt part. It is locked. You're not going to be overclocking it. For that use case, this is probably okay. If it helps any, it is a 3+2 phase VRM.
Okay.
I mean, yes, it is a very basic budget board. If we go and take a look at the page, it is a very basic B360 budget board.
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I mean, for somebody scraping by with pennies, I mean, this probably isn't a bad deal. $200 and you get a board and an i5, right? So
yeah, at $200, if you want to build an Intel system, you can't really go wrong with this.
You could throw 16 gigs of some cheap DDR4 in there.
Right, because memory speed for Intel isn't as important as it is for AMD.
Right.
So some decent DDR4 2400 or 2666. and you have a solid core. Now, of course, you will need a graphics card with that. Thankfully, that's also one of the deals we'll be discussing this evening. But obviously, maybe you don't want Intel. Maybe you're concerned about the spoiler exploit. Maybe you prefer to have an AMD CPU. Well, thankfully, you can get a Ryzen 7 1700 with the Wraithspire cooler for just $169.33.
Yeah,
With free 2-day shipping from Amazon.
that's a pretty good deal. Because you can overclock that to 3.6 or 3.7 with the Wraithspire.
Now, there are technically other places where you can get it slightly cheaper, but I went and checked this one earlier. Stock on that one's really low.
What, on the Amazon?
On the deals a day one, that's about $6 cheaper.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That, and it is free shipping, but it is not 2-day shipping. So, you might be asking,
go ahead.
Okay, that gives me a 8-core, 16-thread processor, but the other one had a motherboard with it. What am I going to do about that? Well, Newegg is having a sale on this ASRock B450 Pro 4 motherboard. Now, would I want to throw a Ryzen 7 1800X or a 2700X on this motherboard?
Nope.
No. But for a Ryzen 7 1700,
yeah,
we're probably okay.
Yeah, I'd say you're probably okay. You could do some mild overclocking, but I wouldn't do anything major.
Right. But the nice thing about this motherboard, it's normally an $80 motherboard. It is on sale right now, or it's normally a $90 motherboard. It is on sale for $80, but there is a $15 rebate, so you can get it for $65. Which means this, combined with the Ryzen 7 1700, winds up costing you only about $30 more than the Intel combo. You get 2 additional cores, 4 additional threads, and support for up to 4 DIMMs of RAM.
No, you get 10 additional threads.
That's right, because the other one is a 6-core, 6-thread. Thank you for catching that. 10 additional threads.
Oh, yeah. It's well worth the $30.
So, yeah, $30 more. You wind up getting a whole lot more for your money. But people said they wanted to see Intel stuff, so I included the best deal I could find for Intel.
I think I know who said they wanted to see Intel stuff. But that's fine.
You know, regardless of which one you prefer, though, Amazon is having a sale on this SanDisk SSD Plus 480 gig internal SSD for $60.
Now that is a steal.
480 gigabytes of SATA 6 gigabits per second storage with read and write speeds of 435 and 445 megabytes per second, respectively. Not the fastest drive out there, but a solid option if you wanted to have a scratch disk or if you wanted to have a games drive. And even in a budget system, it would even be a solid boot disk.
Well, SanDisk is one of the best brands out there in terms of reliability for flash memory.
That's true.
You can't go wrong getting a SanDisk drive, honestly. They're like Toyota, right? Like in all of the performance categories, they're probably a B or a C rating, but at the end of the day, they're super reliable. Like you just throw it in your computer and forget about it.
So yeah, these are currently back ordered, as you might have noticed. At the moment, it is ships within 1 to 3 weeks. However, once it does ship, it is available for Prime shipping.
Nice.
And last but most certainly not least, the deal I've talked up several times already, and it's a solid one because we've seen this one, very similar ones before from other brands. This time, it's a Gigabyte Radeon RX 570. It's a 4 gig variant this time, but it is $149.99 with a $20 mail-in rebate, bringing the price down to $129.99. But it also comes with that $99 AMD gift where you can choose 2 of the 3 available games, and those 3 games are Tom Clancy's The Division 2, Devil May Cry 5, or the new Resident Evil 2 remake. So you can pick 2 of those, which are $50 to $60 games, at which point, basically, in a sense, because you're getting $100 worth of games and you're getting $20 rebate back, you ultimately only wind up paying about $30 for this card.
That's crazy. I mean, even if you just look at the base price with the mail-in rebate, with it coming down to about 109, that's pennies more than what we're kind of used to seeing the 560s priced at.
Right. At 129, right now, the RX 574 gigs are cheaper than the GTX 1050 Ti's and much, much faster.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the 570 on average is pretty close to the 1060 in performance. So now it's only got the 4 gig frame buffer, so it's not going to be beating into the 6 gig card, but
for 1080p gaming, you're not likely to run out of VRAM buffer at 1080p, and that's what this is designed for.
Right. That's a steal.
So that is all of our hardware deals for this week. As you can see, we were able to find sufficient parts to put together most of a PC, regardless of whether you want an AMD or an Intel system. All you really need is some RAM and a power supply, and you'd be good, and a case, and you're good to go.
Sweet.
All right, and that is, well, that's the end of my show notes for this week. Let me show my lovely face again. So, Jason, anything else you'd like to add?
Nah, I think you pretty well covered it this week, man. I can't really think of anything.
Oh, right. You wanted to see that laptop of mine. If you don't mind taking the stage for a minute, I'll be right back.
I could dance. You want me to dance? Yeah. Actually, I have no idea what to say. So, for my birthday, I'm going to upgrade my case. I have a Mesh 5C and some water cooling in it. And I'm probably going to upgrade to an H500P mesh and just go crazy on the rads with it. So I wasn't sure what to talk about. So I was talking about my birthday present to myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this is the backpack that came with my Dell Inspiron XPS.
Wow.
That I was talking about earlier. This was one of the perks, was it came with this backpack because this thing is friggin' heavy.
It looks like you just bought it.
Well, I've taken very good care of it over the years.
I can see. It almost looks like luggage. Is that a pull-out handle?
No, it's just a nice...
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
But if we unzip this thing... By the way, here's the power brick. The 220-watt power brick.
Oh, my gosh.
Because this thing is a power hog.
I bet.
Now, when I said it was a big chunk, I meant it.
Oh my gosh, look at that thing.
Look at how thick this thing is.
Wow. That's a desktop replacement, man.
Yes, it is. And this is the 15-inch model.
I like the wrapper on the
Yeah,
back.
that was one of the nice things about the XPSs of this time period, was you could get these top overlays for them.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried looking for if anyone still has any of them, and unfortunately I haven't found any. Because there were some other really neat designs from this time period. This was the one called Matrix. So
Nice.
You can guess why.
You know what that reminds me of? Stargate. Because in Stargate and Stargate Atlantis, I want to say they were using XPSs.
So if we can get a...
Yep.
So if we can get a look here, this is a 1920 by 1200 screen, by the way.
4x3.
Yeah. And let's see. If I remember right, I had Linux installed on this one. Oh, no, battery's dead. So, I mean, it's a 15-year-old lithium-ion battery. It's going to be dead.
Right.
I could power this up, but I'd have to find somewhere to plug it in first.
Don't worry about it.
It did come with a DVD, ROM, and CBRW drive.
Nice.
On the back, it had both VGA and DVI ports.
And a healthy amount of USB.
Unfortunately,
Ethernet.
they're all USB 1.1.
Yeah.
S-Video, if you wanted to go really ancient.
Wow.
Let's see. Were there any other unusual things?
There's your modem.
Yeah, it does have a modem. And it does have gigabit Ethernet.
Gigabit?
It does have gigabit.
Really?
Also has FireWire.
Yep.
So, like I said, unfortunately, I can't show it to you all tonight because the battery has, well, it doesn't hold charge very well or very long anymore. But I did have Ubuntu, Linux, let's see, I believe it was 14.04 installed on this last time I powered it up.
Nice.
That's been about a year ago, though.
Okay.
But yeah, that was my gaming laptop that I took with me to college, and in hindsight, it was a massive mistake. I should have just gotten myself a cheaper laptop and then built myself a gaming desktop. But I was young and dumb, and I had scholarship money.
There you go. It's all good.
So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed our content, then thank you very much for watching to this point in the show. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, of course, you can check out our playlist of our previous TechForge podcasts. If you also want to view some of the other content here on the CFG YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. You can also find the links down below to all the articles of everything we've discussed, as well as the hardware deals that we presented this evening. You can also find links to all of our social media, the CrossForge Gaming Facebook, Twitter, and Discord server. In the meantime, I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge, and remember, Jesus loves you, and forge on.